Today I'm going to talk to you guys about something that, lives with me every day, and that's, the teaching of social studies and this idea of preparing a citizenry and working with kids to be civil and engage in civil dialogue and be the citizens that we need them to be to do all of these things that we've been talking about today. And so this very first thing, I need a little bit of audience participation, not quite as awesome as the earlier demonstration with music therapy, but I need you to name that year. So here is a description. High school. After a year of history instruction, students scored a shabby 33%. The overall score at the elementary level was a dismal 16%. In college, after a third exposure to history, scores barely approached the halfway mark with a 49%. What year do you think these statistics were put up? Anybody want to guess? Shout them out. Last year? No. 2000? No. 2013? No. 46 is moving in the right direction. The year was 1917. In 1917, we were saying these things about how dismal our students' appreciation for their own history was, and oh my gosh, they don't know what they're talking about, and our country is going to suffer for it. They might as well have had the jaywalking all-stars going on at that point in time as well to highlight just how dismal our historical education and appreciation for this was. Things haven't changed much in the last 100 years with people's appreciation for what's happening with kids in history, but the circumstances under which kids are living have changed dramatically, and they live in these gigantic, exciting, fast, overwhelming, impressive, crushingly big times. They need an education that can also move at that pace with them in a way that inspires them to be modern as their citizenry, and not just sitting in a classroom invoking the Ferris Bueller moment of anyone kind of moment. We all know we've been in these history classrooms. And so how do we approach that education, and how do we get that citizenry that we need, but also that level of civility? So, you get to these moments when you're a teacher and you have certain topics you're supposed to cover, like the War of 1812. And sometimes you dream of these moments happening in your class where some child will bust through the door and go, "Miss, that War of 1812, I just gotta know more." Has yet to happen in 15 years, but one can hold out hope. But that's not how it goes. There aren't kids just kind of clamoring for more historical knowledge or being introduced to more facts and dates. That's not the way to get this modern citizenry equipped to deal with the fast-paced information and what they're seeing. The thing that we need, and this is kind of the pyramid of awesome for teaching, which is we gotta foster inquiry, scaffold their curiosity, and make them the architects of their own participation. And so ask some big questions. Then get them very curious to go seek out answers by crafting participatory activities with them. And so it is this, space where you inspire kids to ask their own questions, which isn't something that all kids are, rolling into school wanting to do. And it isn't something that they all of a sudden go, what I really want to do? I want to think more and a little bit harder than I did before. So if you could ratchet it up a notch, I just am not using my mind enough. Also, nothing that you hear from children, but you can get them moving on that path with really interesting things. And so you go out and find the interesting. And a list of dates and facts is not that. So what are some of the things that you do? One of the things that I did was, I was big into, I crafted this thing called citizenship homework while I was teaching in Philadelphia. And so we would do things around the election. This was a mock election. I let them run the whole thing themselves. They crafted everything. Big idea was that kids had an opinion, understood the process. The kids studied it up. We had a mock election. I would also have the kids visit the polls. They would go out to the polls, do an interview, come back, collect photos, talk to people about why they vote, what their big issues were. Again, getting them in the active process of being a citizen. There were moments where I had these great opportunities to take them places. We, on a very short notice, organized a huge field trip for about 35 kids to DC from Philly. And if anybody has ever tried to get a field trip approved, you know 3 days was not a lot of notice to get kids from Philly to DC. But we walked into this event invited by this organization called Why Tuesday, where they were launching new legislation. And there were about 60 people in the room, and 30 of them were my students. And they were interacting with politicians and lobbyists and big thinkers in the area of why people vote, how they vote, and what's going on. And the day ends like this. Beautiful day. Kids on the lawn of the Capitol. It's like every social studies teacher's dream. But again, this moment of participation, these kids had to get up at about 4:30 in the morning to hit a bus at 5:30 to get there in time, and every one of them showed up on time, ready to go, just so excited to be part of something, to be actively participating. The citizenship homework also took them to places like my winter citizenship homework was attend a public meeting. And the kids would go out, and they'd think it was going to be a little bit like the election one, and they'd come back and they'd say, "Why did you do that to us? That was really boring." And I'd look at them and I said, "Well, what do you think? Why do you think I sent you there?" And they were like, "Well, did you know that you have to put your name in ahead of time to get to speak, and then you only get 3 minutes? I think that's kind of rude." And they just have these funny interpretations of the process of being part of the political machine and trying to get their voice heard and all of those moments. And I would look at them and I'd say, I don't want the very first time that you see this process to be the one where you need to be heard. I want you to know what that feels like coming in the door and go practice being the citizen. One of the funniest moments ever was a student came back from a school board meeting. I was always a little bit nervous when they head off to the school board meeting, because these were a very empowered group of kids who would often be very forthcoming with their ideas. And she said, well, they had this PowerPoint that they were using. They were using it kind of wrong. They were reading off their slides, and it wasn't very good. And I said, well, that happens sometimes. Different people use it differently. And she goes, yeah, I thought maybe at the break I should go up and offer to help them. And I was like, oh, you didn't do that right. And she was like, no, I thought better of it. But I'm like, oh, I need that phone call from a school board member, so one of your students. But again, it's this moment of trying to generate that curiosity, that inquiry, and then that active moment where they actually get to go out and participate in their community. My good friend Chris Lehman says, in schools, if we shoot for workforce, we get workforce. But if we shoot for citizenship, workforce will be one of the also byproducts of. But we've got to shoot for citizenship and not just workforce, and these are some of the reasons why. So then we switch to another one of the activities I did, which is more digital. So there were active participation in real spaces, but then also these digital moments. I would host Twitter chats during the State of the Union, and you would get moments like this from Alona. She's pontificating about we need to create citizens and not robots. Kind of awesome. You'd get this moment where my friend Scott Floyd from Texas chimes in with the kids asking how many other high school students were doing something like this on that particular day. And then just a couple nights ago, my former student, Jessica, chimes in with, I'm still watching, and she's now in college. And these moments of connection and citizenship and participation that can spin both up in real and digital spaces. So now you kind of get the sense of what kids have potential to be and the types of citizens they can become. So how are the adults doing? And this is kind of one of those moments where you think about that issue of how do we get our kids to become the citizens we want, and then what is the world that we're having them walk into? And these are a couple of statistics about how civil we are right now as our citizenry and what that looks like. I'm not going to read all of these to you, but they are a dismal set of statistics to take a look at. But 95% of people in America, we don't agree on anything, but 95% of us believe we do have a civility problem. And I would posit it's a big one. And there are enough moments to ask ourselves, is this really the world we're creating for these kind of dynamic, awesome, just ready to go students to walk into in a very uncivil and not very positive environment? And 70% of people think that it has risen to crisis levels. What is this civil world that we need to create? How are we going to get there? And what are the things that all of us can be doing to get us to that point? And so one of the things that I encourage everyone to do here is to become an active participant. One of the things that technology has done is allowed us to empower our voices, amplify individuals, connect with others, and do these amazing things. But it has another side where we can sit in our chair and hit the like button and break someone down digitally and comment on somebody else's actions with doing nothing ourselves. And if we passively keep interacting with our world like that, we are going to continue to polarize and separate and not have the robust conversation that this country needs to have. If there is one constant, it is that this country is diverse. I have lived in 4 distinct regions, from rural to urban, small city to large. I have seen the gamut and lived in those communities. And these places need to speak to each other. They need to come across those boundaries, but they need to do it with a civil dialogue, and we're not there. We keep engaging in conversation of, I am right, you are wrong, and never really saying, I hear you, I understand, I disagree. Those differences in the way that we approach this conversation can be massively empowering to moving that conversation forward. So as you listen today, a lot of people share these really awesome things that they were doing actively in their communities. When you hear these stories, or you listen to other talks online, or you hear what other people are doing and you think, that's awesome, you should also think, what am I gonna do? Not just sit in awe of somebody else's action, but really challenge yourself to invest, because the power of these kinds of community events are to make connection, to have you work with each other, to identify problems and solutions within your community, and really draw those connections together. Because without this civility, without getting that bedrock right, we are going to erode our stability, renewal, evolution, and change. Great article written out of the Boston Globe a couple years ago. And that's a really huge thing. A community that decides to be civil, to engage in their citizenry, will have these moments and can push forward, be agile, be resilient, adapt and change over time. But the ones who decide that the people that don't disagree just have to stay in separate places are never going to bridge those gaps and move to those very powerful places. So as you leave today, I really encourage you guys to really ask yourself, am I, in my interactions, thinking about how to actively participate and really impact those around me? How am I being civil in that? How am I engaging in conversation with people I don't necessarily always agree with but need to understand? And how can we all become much more responsible, respectful, and powerful citizens? Thank you for your time. I wish you a fabulous rest of the day.